I never believed in haunted houses. I believed in bad neighborhoods, greedy landlords, and old buildings that made strange noises because they were falling apart. Ghosts were just stories people told to explain things they couldn't understand. That's exactly what I kept telling myself when I rented a 3-bedroom house outside a tiny town in Ohio for only $500 a month. My name is Ethan, I'm 28 years old, and after losing my job at a marketing company, I had almost nothing left. My savings disappeared within weeks, my apartment lease ended, and I was one missed payment away from living in my car. Then I found the advertisement. The price looked impossible. Every other house in the area cost at least 3 times more. I called immediately. The owner, an old man named Walter, agreed to meet me that same afternoon. The moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The entire street was silent. No children were playing outside. No dogs barked. Even the wind seemed to avoid the place. Walter was already waiting on the porch. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in years. He unlocked the front door, handed me the keys without asking for references, and quietly said, "The rent is always paid on time. Just don't go into the basement after midnight." I laughed because I thought he was joking, but his face never changed. He climbed into his old pickup truck and drove away without saying another word. I walked through the house alone. It was old but surprisingly clean. Dust covered the shelves. Faded family photographs had been removed from the walls, leaving bright rectangles where they once hung, and every wooden floorboard groaned beneath my feet. I convinced myself that every strange feeling came from stress. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, unpacking my clothes, and setting up an air mattress in the living room. As darkness settled outside, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. There were no sounds. Not a single passing car. No insects, no birds. It was as if the entire neighborhood stopped existing after sunset. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of footsteps directly above me. They were slow, heavy, and deliberate. Someone walked from one side of the upstairs hallway to the other, paused for several seconds, then started walking back again. My heart pounded as I grabbed the flashlight beside my bed and searched every room upstairs. Every bedroom was empty. Every closet was empty. Every window was locked from the inside. There was absolutely nowhere for anyone to hide. Trying to calm myself, I walked back downstairs and froze. The basement door was standing wide open. I clearly remembered locking it before going to sleep. A freezing draft rolled out from the darkness below, carrying the smell of damp earth, mold, and something that reminded me of decaying meat. I aimed my flashlight down the staircase, but the beam seemed to disappear into the darkness before reaching the bottom. I couldn't breathe. The whisper sounded exactly like my own voice, only deeper, older, as if someone had spent years listening to every word I had ever spoken. My flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled across the wooden floor, before stopping beside the basement door. A second later, the door slammed shut so violently that the entire house shook. I rushed forward and grabbed the handle, but it refused to move. It felt as though someone on the other side was pulling it with impossible strength. Then, just as suddenly, everything became silent. I stood there for nearly a minute, staring at the old wooden door, waiting for another sound. Nothing happened. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Old houses creaked. Pipes made strange noises. Stress could make people hear things that weren't really there. After everything that had happened during the past few months, maybe my mind was finally breaking. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, hoping the cold night air would calm me down. Instead, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Every house on the street was completely dark. Not one porch light was on. No television glow leaked through the windows. No cars passed. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a forgotten town. Across the road, an elderly man stood silently on his porch watching me. I raised my hand to wave, but the moment our eyes met, he slowly turned around, walked inside, and locked his front door. The next morning, I drove into town looking for answers. At a small diner near the highway, I casually mentioned the address to the waitress. The smile disappeared from her face. She leaned closer and whispered, "You're staying in the Keller house, aren't you?" I nodded. She looked around to make sure nobody was listening before speaking again. "People don't stay there very long." Before I could ask what she meant, the cook called her name, and when she returned a minute later, she acted as if we had never spoken. Still searching for answers, I visited the local library. An elderly librarian pointed me toward the newspaper archives. After nearly an hour of searching, I found an article dated 23 years earlier. Family of 4 vanishes without a trace. The address beneath the headline matched my house exactly. According to the report, the police found dinner still sitting on the table, children's toys scattered across the living room, and every door locked from the inside. The family's car remained parked outside, but the parents and their 2 children had simply disappeared. Investigators believed the basement might hold clues, but before they could finish searching it, part of the staircase suddenly collapsed, injuring an officer and forcing everyone to leave. The case was never solved. I folded the newspaper with trembling hands and drove home before sunset. As I stepped inside the house, my blood ran cold. The basement door was standing open again, and this time a trail of fresh muddy. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The muddy footprints were fresh, dark, and still dripping onto the wooden floor as if whoever had made them had entered the house only moments earlier. My heart pounded against my chest while I slowly followed the trail with my flashlight. Every footprint was exactly the same size, but something about them felt wrong. They were only left footprints. There wasn't a single print from a right foot. It was impossible. I followed them down the hallway until they stopped directly outside my bedroom door. My hands were shaking as I pushed the door open. The room looked completely normal. My clothes were folded on the chair. My backpack rested beside the bed, and the window was still locked from the inside. I searched everywhere, under the bed, inside the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing. I was about to leave when my flashlight landed on something lying in the middle of my pillow. It was an old black and white photograph that definitely hadn't been there before. The picture showed a smiling family of 4 standing in front of the same house. The father had one arm around his wife while their young daughter smiled at the camera. Only the little boy looked different. He wasn't smiling. He was staring directly into the camera, with an expression that felt almost like a warning. I turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded black ink were 4 words. "Don't go downstairs tonight." A chill ran through my entire body. I dropped the photograph and immediately searched every room again, convinced someone had entered while I was away. Every door was locked. Every window was secured from the inside. The only thing standing open was the basement door. I slammed it shut, locked it, and pushed the heavy dining table against it before calling the local police. About 20 minutes later, a county deputy arrived. His name tag read Miller. He listened carefully while I explained everything. The footsteps, the whisper that sounded like my own voice, the mysterious text message, the muddy footprints, and finally the photograph. I expected him to laugh or tell me I was imagining things, but he didn't. Instead, he picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. His face turned pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly. I pointed toward my bedroom. He stared at the picture for several seconds before speaking again. "I've seen this before." He explained that nearly 20 years earlier, another family had reported finding the exact same photograph inside the house just days before they disappeared. The evidence was placed in storage, but somehow it vanished before the investigation ended. Nobody ever found it again. Before I could ask another question, every light inside the house flickered 3 times. Then everything went black. We stood in complete silence until 3 slow knocks echoed from beneath the floor. Miller aimed his flashlight toward the basement door. The heavy dining table I had pushed against it the dining table scraped violently across the wooden floor until it slammed into the wall with a deafening crash. Deputy Miller and I stood frozen, our flashlights fixed on the basement door as it slowly creaked open by itself. A freezing gust of air rolled out from the darkness below, carrying the familiar smell of damp earth, rust, and something rotten. Then we heard footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They weren't climbing. The stairs, they were moving in circles beneath them, as if something was waiting for us to come down. Miller drew his service pistol and whispered, "Stay behind me." Every instinct told me to run, but my legs refused to move. We stepped closer together until we reached the top of the basement stairs. I aimed my flashlight downward, but the beam vanished halfway down, swallowed by a darkness that didn't seem natural. It wasn't just the absence of light. It felt alive. Then a little girl's voice drifted up from below. "Daddy, please help me." Miller froze instantly. His breathing became uneven. Without taking his eyes off the staircase, he whispered, "That's my daughter." Before I could respond, the voice came again, softer this time. "Daddy, I'm scared." Miller took another step toward the basement like he was under a spell. I grabbed his arm and pulled him backward with all my strength. The moment I touched him, the sweet little voice transformed into something deep, distorted, and inhuman. It burst into loud, mocking laughter that echoed through every room of the house. Every window rattled. The walls vibrated. Miller stumbled backward, his hands shaking uncontrollably. After several long seconds, he whispered, "My daughter died in a car accident 12 years ago." Silence returned as suddenly as it had disappeared. Then the basement door slammed shut so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. A second later, every light in the house flickered back on, making the nightmare seem almost unreal. Miller lowered his weapon and finally admitted. There was something the town had hidden for decades. The Keller house wasn't haunted because of the missing family. It had been built directly above the entrance to an abandoned coal mine, long before the house existed. Miners claimed they heard voices underground calling them deeper into the tunnels. Some workers disappeared without leaving behind a single trace. The mine was eventually sealed, but strange disappearances continued after the house was built. Every family who lived there reported hearing familiar voices coming from the basement. Some escaped. Others were never seen again. Miller looked directly into my eyes and spoke slowly. "Whatever is down there doesn't chase people. It waits until they trust the voice." Before I could answer, my phone suddenly began ringing. There was no number on the screen. Only one word appeared in bright, white letters. Mom. My mother had died from cancer 5 years earlier. My hands started shaking as I stared at the screen. The call answered S.